we see that a fierce rivalry between two islands is about to come to an end. This is because the king of Greenleaf Island is getting married to the princess of Fresh Flower Island. Several people have gathered to witness the historical event. However, the king is nowhere to be seen as he is fast asleep in his bed. It turns out that this is not unusual for him. He is known as the Sleeping King because sometimes he can sleep for days. Despite this, all the people on the island love and admire him and elected him the king a year ago. Meanwhile, the bride, Ing, approaches her sleeping husband and asks him to wake up. From their conversation, we learn that the two were in a relationship before their marriage was arranged. However, since the king was a commoner, she abruptly broke up with him. Now, they have once again reunited for the sake of their islands. And while Ing is fine with it, the king holds a grudge for what she did to him. It turns out that he wants to take revenge on her, and this is why he agreed to the marriage. The king doesn't waste any time and sets his plan in motion that very night. First, he seduces his wife and makes her happy, but then he unleashes an array of insults at her, criticizing her rival island. He also belittles her parents for offering a cheap dowry, which is of no use to a rich king like him. Hearing all this, Ing apologizes for abruptly dumping him in the past, but the king is having none of it. Following this, he places her hand beneath his head and warns her that she can only move when he does. Ing is distraught that she has to go through all of this just because of something she did in the past, but surprisingly, unbeknownst to her, the king is still in love with her. Deep down, he is elated that he can finally spend time with the love of his life. In the next scene, we are taken to a club where a beautiful dancer is captivating several customers around her. Surprisingly, when her face is revealed, we learn that she looks exactly like Princess Ing. The next morning, the king continues making his wife's life difficult. Poor Ing asks that they can forget the past and move on with their lives, but the king becomes belligerent. To apologize, Ing quickly praises his appearance, saying that he is the most handsome man on the island. However, the king once again takes it as an insult and chastises her. He wants to make her feel bad every chance he gets. The same day, the king decides to inspect a construction site, and Ing decides to join him. As they walk, she holds his hand so people won't suspect their strained relationship. However, when the king continues tormenting her, Ing decides to fight back. She deliberately feeds him a sour tangerine, embarrassing him in front of everyone. Next, we are introduced to General He. He was a candidate for the throne, but the sleeping king prevailed over him marginally. The general was not satisfied with the result, believing that he was more worthy of the title. If you love detailed recaps and breaking down hidden detail, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new video. However, over time, he slowly accepted his new king. One afternoon, he is at the club when his eyes land on the dancer. He recognizes her as Aang and runs to meet her. However, by the time he is downstairs, Aang has left the stage and is nowhere to be found. Back in the palace, the king is working late, so Aang goes to his office with food. She also brought 15 roses to express her apologies for feeding him sour tangerine. As expected, the king doesn't appreciate her efforts, and instead, he asks her to feed him. Annoyed, Ing puts the soup near his mouth but pulls it away when he is about to consume it. The king scolds her harshly and tells her to sit with him as his servant. However, Ing refuses. She says that they are each other's servants as husband and wife. At night, the back and forth continues, and the king asks her to lay down her hand yet again. A while later, Ing walks outside but returns with an incense stick for mosquitoes to deal with the mosquitoes that have been bothering her husband. The king adores the gesture but pretends to be unimpressed. When she falls asleep, he remembers the day he met her for the first time. He was a mere construction worker and she was a rich lady walking down the street. Her kindness is what caught his eye as she treated the poor with kindness and respect. They met a few times and fell in love with each other, but one day, Ing told him that her family would never accept their relationship. The king waited outside her inn for the next month, but she never returned. Then one day, he saw a car drive past. Inside was the love of his life, making out with another man. He vowed to never forgive her, but they crossed paths again when he saw her in the palace after the Battle of the Two Islands. He had suppressed his feelings for her, but seeing her again made them flood back. The next day, General He and a foreigner come to the palace to attend a dinner with the king and his queen. To the general's surprise, Ing looks exactly like the dancer he is obsessed with, and they also have the same name. He composes himself and asks to raise a toast for the new queen, but a protective king claims that only he can drink in her name. A while later, she excuses herself to go to the washroom. The general follows behind and calls her out for marrying the king for money. He is again shocked when she claims that she is the princess of Fresh Flower Island. It is then revealed that the dancer Ing and the princess are two different people who are identical in appearance. The general is in love with the dancer, which is why seeing the princess made him go crazy. Just then, the king arrives and accuses the general of harassing his wife. Ing wants to defuse the situation, so she takes the general's side and claims they were just talking. The king doesn't trust her and drags her into the room. He berates her for humiliating her husband and hitting on every man in the palace. She is left crying in the room after he accuses her of being unfaithful. Elsewhere, the general goes to the club and happens to meet the dancer. He asks her what she was doing in the palace, but the woman doesn't have any clue what he is talking about. The general realizes he was mistaken about the queen because she and Ing look identical. The next day, the king calls Ing to his office and apologizes for being rude the previous day. He hugs her tightly, making sure she cannot run away. Later, Ying's younger brother Wu Tong comes to the palace to spy on her. He wants to ensure that the king is taking care of his sister. He goes to the queen's quarters and looks around before driving away with his assistant. When the king returns home, a maid tells him about the man who entered the queen's quarters secretly. The king burns in anger and runs to his wife with a gun. She never saw anyone come inside, but the king refuses to believe her. Moreover, he finds a cigarette on the table and knows that Ing doesn't smoke. He crosses all lines and calls her a whore who sleeps with every man she meets. She slaps him in a fit of rage, but it only multiplies his anger. He then tries to undress her while she yells at him to stop. When Ing realizes where the commotion is leading, she stabs him with her hairpin. The king simply gets up and walks outside in despair, while the queen cries her heart out. Somewhere else, Wu Tong is in a restaurant where he hears two people talking about how the queen never smiled. The information is enough for him to want to save his sister. He runs to her quarters in the palace and finds her with blood on her clothes. Even though it's the king's blood, Wu Tong can no longer let Ing stay with him. They pack her belongings and leave the palace. Later that day, the king finds out that his wife got into a car with a man and left. He sees red and orders the guards to follow the car. I'd love to know your thought. Drop a comment with your favorite moment from this show, and don't forget to subscribe for more discussions like this. They surround Wu Tong with guns, and the king realizes that Ing is with her brother and not a lover. Still, he cannot forget everything else she has done. He holds Wu Tong hostage for trying to kidnap his wife and brings Ing back to the palace. She begs him to set her brother free, but the king remains adamant. This causes a huge argument between the two. The king claims he will let Wu Tong go if she admits to making love to a man in a car 2 years ago. Ing has no idea what he is talking about, but she does what he says. She is even made to admit that she had an affair in front of the entire town, while her husband stands smugly, unaware that she has been nothing but loyal to him. Ing has no joy left in life. She stops smiling and talks only when necessary. A few days later, the king's anger dies down and he approaches her again, but this time Ing doesn't try to please him, not even a little bit. She wants divorce and is eager to return home where she is respected and still has a life. The king tries convincing her otherwise, but nothing works. Seeing that she is still proud of herself after performing such atrocities, he allows her to return home. A few days later, the general comes to the king with an invitation to his wedding. He is marrying the other AI Ing in a month. He also mentions that the woman looks identical to the queen, which is why he was confused at the dinner last time. At first, the king doesn't believe him, but when the other Ing enters the office, he is left speechless. Only then does he realize that he has made a terrible mistake. He accused his wife of adultery when it was his misunderstanding all along. The general offers to apologize to the queen because he was the one who didn't tell them about the doppelganger sooner. However, the king knows that nothing he says will bring the queen back after how much he has hurt her, so he resorts to forcing her to return. Without wasting time, he goes to meet Wu Tong again and stops his car using his guard. Wu Tong, on the other hand, slaps him in the face, accusing him of hurting his sister. The king accepts that he has been wrong, but promises to treat her better if she returns home. He also admits that he is in love with her and is willing to do anything to get her back. After confirming that his feelings are genuine, Wu Tong agrees to help. In the following scene, Ing gets a message from the king saying that he has kidnapped Wu Tong and will only let him go if she returns to the palace. Ing has to reluctantly agree to meet him again, but when they do, she points a gun at him ready to kill him to get her brother back. The king knows that she loves him as much as he loves her and isn't scared of the gun. In the end, he brings her back home and starts apologizing every day. He makes her food, brings her flowers, and speaks lovingly to her all day long. Eventually, Ing softens to his efforts. Still, she doesn't make his life easy, accusing him of calling her ugly and starting fight like he used to do with her. On the first snowfall, the king kneels down in front of the entire town and apologizes to clear his wife's name. The people admire him for accepting his mistake and sympathize with the queen who was falsely accused. One day, Ing pretends to have a severe stomachache. Her motive is to simply trouble the king. A while later, the fertility doctor arrives and hands her some medicine so that she can get pregnant. The same day, Ing approaches the maid and questions why she hasn't gotten pregnant despite sleeping with her husband every night. In response, the maid reveals that a woman can only conceive if her husband showers her with lots of love. Although the maid tried to explain it metaphorically, Ing takes it the wrong way. Hence, she takes the king on a shopping spree and makes him carry all her bag. Ing believes that this is how one can get pregnant. After walking around for hours, they come across Wu Tong. He tries insulting the king, but this time Ing intervenes, defending her husband. Moved by the stance, he falls to his knees and apologizes, and Ing finally forgives him. The movie ends as the lovely king and queen celebrate a festival together with their loved ones. Thanks for watching this recap. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next movie recap. Stay tuned for more exciting recaps.